right, so thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We're going to be discussing the power of landscaping design and transformed roof decks. This is all about adding value and bringing spaces to life, which, you know, as we head into the July 4th holiday, I'm sure many people are interested in doing that so we can get barbecues out and whatever else there might be to do with your landscaping and roof decks. All right, so joining with me tonight, I have a father-son duo, very exciting, Eric Wegweiser and his son, Jake. Thank you so much for coming to us, having us. We're happy to have you. And they are both from Horticultural Creations, which, as I just mentioned, is a family business that started in 1976 through a partnership between a florist and an artist. And they've been transforming the brand image of New York City luxury hotels, offices, residential apartments, spaces, event spaces, corporate lobbies, custom floral arrangements, you name it, they do it. Landscaping, green design, and very importantly, holiday decor, which I'm sure is something that you're going to look into in the future. And then we have our very own Chris Alker. Chris is our vice president of operations and compliance. He's also our in-house architect. He's been doing this for over 20 years. And he will, I'm sure, have a lot of different opinions on best options for utilizing your roof and landscaping. So thank you, Chris. And I don't know if I even introduced myself. I'm Elise Rosemarin. I'm a senior vice president here at AKAM. So thank you so much. All right, we're going to get started. So a little bit about what we're doing tonight. We just did our introductions. We'll talk about the future of landscaping, you know, what's going on, what's on trend, landscaping and roof design. And then of course we can do a question and answer. We recommend that you do your Q&A in the Q&A box, and we will try and answer questions as they come in. Thank you. All right, so let's get started. So what is the future of landscaping? Tell us.
Well, first off, just wanted to say thank you for having Eric and I join you, especially for tonight, and for everybody taking the time out on a shortened holiday week, as well as on a 6 p.m. On a Wednesday. So thank you to everybody joining. So we're thrilled to be here and kind of speak, but there's a lot of talk about just landscaping in general, how it helps, what are the pros and cons, more importantly, what's the return on investment of landscaping and how to quantify that. So what we're going to do is kind of go through that. But first, it's important to talk about, you know, kind of where landscaping is now, where it was, and where it's going. So as we know right now, especially with COVID happening and people working from home a lot, there's a really big push for health and wellness, more so than there's ever been before. And really, it's more about the mental well-being, very much still about your physical well-being, but really about your mental space at work, how you're feeling, what your emotional response is to the environment that you're in, both good and bad, so you can see how to improve on the negative, but also what's the positive so you can retain more of those. So with greenery in general, there's been many studies, but there are studies that help show, you know, by having some sort of greenery inside or in your natural human-made space, like an office space or a rooftop or a lobby, really that greenery has been shown to help not only increase productivity, but also just general happiness and well-being. And that's up to almost 15% just by some case studies. And in terms of the physical benefits as well, there's also the air purification aspect. So there are certain plants that actually eat and absorb the negative toxins in the air that we breathe and turns it into CO2 to help clean the air and purify. And over time, it actually helps with that. So all in all, that just encompasses with the physical well-being, mental well-being, and it does a really, really powerful job of making you feel connected with the natural world, which helps stir productivity and brainstorming and things of that nature. So more designs are coming to help push that health and wellness experience in the future.
Yeah,
Do you think you could give us like some examples? I mean, have you had boards, or is it, I guess I don't know what your main clientele is. Is it building boards, or is it private terraces, or I assume it's both? Like, can you give us examples of some sort of specific health and wellness requests that you guys have received and fleshed out?
Yeah, for sure. So a big part of it is That's a great question, and it doesn't matter the clientele really. It could be a terrace, it could be a board, it could be a commercial building. It really doesn't. But all the questions are generally the same in the sense of, in a physical sense, how can you help physically beautify the space? And with that comes with the air purification. So bringing people back to the office, right? How do you make people feel safe? How do you make people feel comfortable? That's on a commercial side, but in residential, how do you make people feel comfortable coming down to the common areas or the amenity spaces or the rooftops, right? So not only is it the beautification aspect of bringing the colors and the greenery to life, but it's really, that really the air purification. That's the biggest thing, honestly, from the physical side of that. Mental and the emotional response, we've been getting a lot of requests, more so about not just green walls and living walls, but any sort of design aspect that makes you feel like you're in a park or you're in some sort of that natural element inside. So it's this concept of biophilic design. And I can tell you how to spell that after this, because me spelling out loud, honestly, is still not very great. But it's basically the study and the idea that it's connecting the human-made world with the natural world and bridging that environment together so that you can feel, like I said, at a park, but you're sitting at your home or you're sitting at the common area. For example, we had a client, this is a commercial client, but it does still tie hand in hand, Deloitte Digital, and they wanted to have their common space and their seating area be used. But they had a pipe above on the ceiling and it kept actually dripping and leaking. And nobody wanted to sit there, do work, and have that annoying drip just drip on your shoulder. Not one, just because it's annoying, but two, I don't want to get wet when I'm working either. So I don't blame them. So what they wanted to do was kind of make a actual outdoor park indoor. So what we did was we actually fabricated in-house a swinging bench that people can sit on like you're at a park, as well as putting artificial grass upside down on the ceiling to not only cover the piping and catch the drip of the water, but also when you look up, it's not that ugly piping that's in an office space, but it made people feel like they were in a park. That space now, I think that they told us, I think it was increase in usage by over 25%, and their employees, every time they go, they always have really powerful brainstorming sessions and come out feeling refreshed. And it's like a little indoor garden that they can experience right in their office space. But you can do that in residential buildings too, and new amenity spaces that are coming out, and more things to give back to your tenants, more things to give back to guests and your employees who make the buildings run so smoothly.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, as a former broker, I think the most utilized amenity is always either the outdoor space or fitness center. And, and as you said, is, we're still in COVID. It'll never end, it seems. But people really need that outdoor space. And a lot of people are working from home now. So in essence, your home and your building is your office. So, that's also, I think, a real reason to have that health, wellness, aspect to buildings. Have you taken any, open spaces and kind of added that wellness factor? Because I think a lot of buildings struggle with, we want to do this, but where do we do it? Not everyone has a garden space.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's honestly what we do as our just on a day-to-day basis, is strategically work with property managers, building owners, board members, you name it, who's kind of involved in the facilities and buildings operations side, landscape architects, to really help figure out, okay, what's the most strategic way to implement green design, not just from a usability standpoint, but also from an aesthetic standpoint, and not just being a cookie cutter plant in a corner and saying wellness, but actually making it a piece of art that people can appreciate and also redeem the benefits, both mental side and physical side. So, yes.
Mm-hmm. This is interesting. So the local laws that we definitely see a lot of with the energy consumption, how do you help buildings in that regard?
So that's a great question. So there's a lot of local laws going around. A lot of people are now focused on the facade side of buildings, which I know my building now is doing. It's very crazy with the noise, but the next round coming up is more about green roofs, solar panels, and helping conserve energy. For buildings, that helps you become LEED certified and more energy efficient. So when you have like the energy efficient ratings and you see some buildings have a C or a D, stuff like this can help you get closer to that A grade and that higher level grade. But basically, the whole premise of creating a green roof or solar panel is that it keeps a lot of the heat and the cooling in the building. So the building doesn't actually waste that much energy. And over time, as a building, you save up on the amount of energy consumption that you have and that you use, so that your building can run more efficiently, use less energy, and obviously pay less in utilities and so forth.
What kind of sort of systems are you using? I mean, I think you're referring to local law 92 and 94 sustainable roofing zones. Are you doing more sort of extensive or intensive roofing system, meaning trays versus, you know, the full depth upside down roof systems? Can you give us an idea of what types of systems you're seeing go in, and what sort of, you know, what seems to be the most effective for serving as insulation and retaining that energy?
Yeah, so it always boils down to what the weight load is. So you need an engineer's weight load report first to determine what system will work the best or be the most efficient. Ironically, tray systems are the most economic, so that's typically what you'll see on most roofs. However, we've done multiple different types of systems, again, depending on what they're trying to achieve. And if the weight load allows it, you can get very thick membrane type of systems that obviously can give you a much more of a latitude in terms of type of plants that you're going to be using.
I mean, it's really interesting that you mentioned the load, because as I'm sure you're aware, or I don't know if I assume you're aware, is, you know, yet another local law, 126 parking garage inspections are a new thing now. And one thing that we've heard about a lot are parking garages that have landscaped roofs, and that soil, I mean, that soil carries an incredible amount of weight once it gets wet and could potentially cause problems for that load. Do you have any tips or thoughts on that? Because I mean, I personally think that landscaped outdoor spaces and the intensive roofs, you know, full depth soil and foliage and everything is amazing. Is there any thoughts you guys have on how to try and prevent that stuff, sort of, not so much a structural question, but sort of deteriorate over time in a way that will create a problem for these garages?
Yeah, no, and that's I'm glad you mentioned that, because so many of our clients are unaware of the amount of load that it requires. And you're right, most people think, oh, well, it's no big deal, but you're right. When it gets wet, it becomes a different animal than when it's dry, right? So it's a bunch of different things you could do. One is, if you're going to do a tray system, that's probably the least weighted system that you can put on a roof deck.
Sorry to interrupt, but what is a tray system?
They're basically like just trays that you stack next to each other, right? So you take mostly it's used like sedum, right? So you take these trays of sedum and you stack them next to each other, and you basically put them so close together that the sedums eventually grow and you don't see the lines of the trays. It's almost like, picture like ice cube trays, so like one right next to each other. And they don't require as much of a membrane, so they're not requiring as much soil. It's not as, when it gets wet, it's not as heavy. However, with that being said, if some of these older garages are an issue, then typically what we find is that it's best to place strategically different plantings that go around. And we'll consider that a, quote, a green roof, but you can certainly help be an additive to that without encumbering upon the weight load restrictions that may apply. But it's a great question, Chris. It really is.
It mentioned Zen gardens. What kind of gardens have you outfitted buildings with? And again, I think what's interesting and what I think buildings are really keen on is transforming spaces that might not already be used as that space. So do you have any examples of a Zen garden you put in that wasn't originally that, or ways to optimize buildings? Because I know that's a very big selling point for buildings. And when buildings aren't highly amenitized and they're older, like Chris was speaking to, they don't have the ability to all of a sudden have a giant terrace. It wasn't built that way. So are there any examples that you have that you've done that with?
For sure. So most common in our experience, and this is a great question, is a lot of it is around like seating areas or common spaces and just adding nice accent pieces that come around And not your stereotypical plant that you see at like Home Depot, like the snake plants or, like the little vine pothos that you might see. But it's stuff that is used in actual Japanese Zen gardens, like maple trees or, marginatas, different things with character that just create a different experience and kind of help you feel a little bit enclosed in your own area. So that's one. There is another one where we actually did a Zen garden to the true definition it's a commercial space, but they basically had it in a back corner where their employees can go and just escape the stressful workday. And basically what they did was we put in a bunch of sand, some river rock, and did succulent cacti to come through so that it looked kind of like a little bit of a desert, a little bit of like the outdoor experience inside. So it really just depends on what the client is looking for and the mood and the vibe that you're trying to create, and you can tailor it towards that. But typically, just to sum it up, it's kind of like those common areas that you can utilize that are for seating or just kind of waiting areas that aren't heavily trafficked all the time. Courtyards are huge as well. If you have any sort of rooftop area, that's an easy one, or a terrace area. But anywhere that people can gather is typically a good spot to think of the Zen garden, just because that's where a lot of the foot traffic goes through.
Could I ask about, and I know this is on the tip of a lot of supers' tongues, is the two things that come to mind immediately when you talk about plants. There's always the one person in the room says, well, I don't like bugs, number one. And number two, what about the maintenance of these spaces? And do you guys perform maintenance contracts? How extensive their maintenance contracts, and or can you design a garden? I assume that succulent cacti and river rock doesn't require a ton of maintenance. Right. Can you tailor the garden to the level of maintenance they're willing to pay or what have you?
Exactly that. So typical in our space is after we do an installation, we do offer a maintenance program, and it's different for outdoor and indoor. It's pretty standard. I would say 99.9% of our clients elect to do the maintenance just to, be hands off so you don't feel responsible and you let the professionals. Like if it was an HVAC unit, I'm not savvier at that at all, so I would want somebody to handle mine for me. But basically outdoors is you can't really control the natural elements of Mother Nature. Unfortunately, I wish I could, but we will be able to tailor plants in the Northeast, because that's where we are here, to withstand all the different natural elements and the changes in weather. So it could be really hot and really humid, and then it could be rainy and really windy the next day. And there's a ton of plants and things that we will offer to make sure that you don't see any deterioration in the foliage, browning of leaves, things like that, so the plants can stay healthy all year round. That's the outside. The inside is exactly right, Chris. It's the same thing, except you can control the elements a little better. You can control the air conditioning, you can control the temperature, you can control where it's placed, and if it's in arm's reach of children or dogs or people to, kind of mess with it. So it's a lot easier to handle. And we actually guarantee those plants going forward. So if any of those do ever need to be replaced, they are living products, so everything does have a lifespan. So eventually when that time does come, it acts as your insurance cost, so you will replace it at no additional charge. But it really depends again on what the client wants. If you want to have stuff that is not like a succulent and it's more of like the green standard plant, it requires a little bit more maintenance, love, and care than the succulent. So it really all depends on the mood you're trying to create.
And for the indoor stuff, I mean, I still want to know about the bugs as well, but for the indoor plants, I was just thinking, are you having to provide supplemental UV lighting or any sort of special lighting in order to sustain any of the planting?
Typically, the lighting that's existing in the spaces are sufficient, depending on the type of plants that you put in. So one of the things that you have to do is do your due diligence and see the environment, see what the lighting factors are. See if it's near a door that's going to be opening in the wintertime, because that's going to have an effect on an indoor plant, as opposed to a revolving door, which is, obviously not allowing those gushes of cold air to come in. So once we do that, then we pretty much help the client select a list of plants that they can choose from that will be conducive to that environment.
And then the next layer on top of that is it southern facing? Is it eastern facing? Yeah. Northern facing? Different parts of the day get different amounts of sunlight. Plants need obviously sunlight to exist and flourish, so that also plays a huge part into it too, as well. But to get to your bug point, because I know that's probably the next question, we get that a ton. And unfortunately, plants get blamed for bugs, even though they are not necessarily the culprit.
Yeah, I guess that's the question. Like, what kind of, are you seeing a lot of bugs? What kind of bugs are they? Are they because of the plants? Is that just a myth? I don't know.
So there are the few exceptions where they come from the nursery and they have the insects on them. That's always the case. So we'll put that, aside. But really what happens is plants are moist because they get watered, and insects love the moisture to nest their eggs and lay their eggs and build a home. So a lot of the times we find it seems like it's gnats, and you might think that, it's because of the plant, but ironically it could come on my shirt from walking outside. There could be a trash can with a piece of food that was left there for an extra 30 minutes that could have gravitated towards, or it could have just flown in through the vents. But once they're in there and in the plant, you'll then start to see a lot, because for every gnat, they lay about 300 eggs at a time. So once you think you got one, you got to handle all 299, but you won't know until they all hatch. So it's a constant process.
And so you're spraying them, or you're just sort of dealing in the traditional way?
Yep. So we do both. Depends on the case. It's case by case. But typically we have our spray, which is all organic, no pesticides or anything like that causes health issues. We definitely don't even consider that at all. So it's all organic, soap, natural alcohol. Sometimes apple cider vinegar even works, just to create like a sweet trap to attract the bugs. But really that's what it is. And then within, sometimes it takes a week, sometimes it takes 2 to 3 weeks. You usually see it clear right up. And basically you just have to let the plants dry out so that there's not really a moist or wet soil for them to lay their eggs. And then they usually find the next breeding ground. Hopefully it's not a plant though. So they move on.
And
I
the
was
other
gonna
thing,
ask, oh, sorry.
the other thing, Chris, that we also use is nematodes. So those we spray twice a year. It's actually an insect that you don't see. They're microscopic, and they love to eat fungus gnats. So we found that to be super successful combating that as well.
Wait, so you're using one insect to take care of another?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Clever.
Yeah. I was going to ask, are there certain plants or florals that you see being used often in residential spaces that are not really ideal, and maybe some that you think are more ideal, just so board members know which way to lean to? Like, I love roses, but maybe those are not ideal for residential properties.
So roses are a good one. I mean, they do have the aesthetics, but again, they have like the thorns on the side. So if you do have more families in your building, you might want to be a little bit more conscious of that with the young kids running around. I know that, colorful things and shiny objects always attracted me as a child. So I'm assuming that other people are like myself and would go and run and try to touch it. So that's not definitely a good thing. But typically all the plants that we use and that we've seen are healthy for anybody to even eat. There's the few that we just, when we see them, we just say we will either replace them or don't use them at all. But it's a very, very, very select few that aren't good. Generally, most of the plants are typically pretty healthy for people and things. That's why, to go back to the health and wellness, a lot of them do help with that air purification, which is why they're just healthy in general.
Yeah, I was just because I remember being on a building, sorry, and I think they use semi-annuals versus annuals, and we were expecting them to be beautiful all year round, and then like they died, and everyone was like, wait, we just spent $100,000 on landscaping and it looks horrible. So, I mean, kind of ways to avoid the pitfalls of that and just understand the longevity of what you plant. And also I think the maintenance is really important too, because I don't know who this building used, but they also didn't put the infrastructure to maintain like the water. I don't know what the irrigation.
Yep.
And so that was an equally expensive replacement, because if someone wasn't going around watering them, they didn't survive. So I guess those are also considerations.
Yeah, I was just going to say that typically it's communication. So it's meeting the expectations of what the client is expecting. Some clients want the annuals and they want to see those seasonal changes. Some do not, and they want perennials. You put it in, you buy them once, and then they come up every single year. So those are conversations that you have to have in the discovery process, right, with the client, and make the client aware of what the pros and cons are going forward with that. And you're right, if you don't have irrigation, undoubtedly you're going to have an issue with your exterior plants. I mean, we're going to start experiencing 90-degree heat up on a terrace. It's, plants are going to just literally just dry out. They're going to melt, right? So if they're not watered and watered frequently, you're going to have an issue. So all that has to be part of the conversation going forward. In terms of individual plants, I think the only thing that you have to consider or should consider, if you're going to do any type of interior living walls, there's always an issues with those as well. A lot of people buy these very fancy irrigation systems and they expect the walls to remain intact. There are plenty of issues with those, and I would steer clear from living walls if I could, or at least explain again, communicate with the client of what the ramifications are going to be in terms of maintenance and keeping those going, which can be quite costly.
Right. No, that's because you want to make something beautiful, but then you don't want to suffer consequences without being mindful. So I think it's great that you educate people. And then I would love to show some of the spaces that I know you all have transformed while speaking about how these spaces give, unique brand identity, because it is important. People think just exteriors matter, but it's really about the way a building can make you feel, and branding, and being known as the building that has this space really is helpful for making a brand awareness for a building. And it can also reestablish buildings that are older, as you transform and according to what's on trend. So I don't know if we can pull up some examples of spaces that you've worked on and maybe just kind of talk us through what you've done. That'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So the overall theme of all of the case studies that we'll talk about and kind of show is really just first impressions. And that ties into brand identity and brand awareness. So I think it's within the first 5 or 7 seconds on average, someone makes up their mind on what type of person you are or space you have or anything in that first thing. So you obviously want whatever the design is, if it's plants, if it's art, if it's furniture, whatever that statement piece is, you want it to be eye capturing so that when they walk in, they get that warm, fuzzy feeling and they're like, oh, cool, this is a fun place. And all welcoming and all that stuff. So if you look over here on the top left, where it kind of looks like this empty tree pit, and then to the right of it looks kind of like that big red bush in the middle. This is actually a backyard for a residential building. They wanted to have a place where they can offer to their tenants to actually have an amenity space to work in a park at home. So they had in the middle of New York this beautiful backyard. I thought it was beautiful when it had nothing. I think it's even more beautiful when it has stuff. But it had a blank canvas that we could work with to really say, hey, this is a blank canvas. What do you want it to look like? How do you want it to feel? So what they wanted to do is they wanted to create a Zen garden effect with northeast plants, which is kind of ironic because they don't really go together. But what we did was we put down pavers that would be used in a Zen garden. It's tough to see in the picture, but it's there, that you can walk through the space. And then we put native plants, native shrubs, and native trees to be able to withstand all the natural elements so that it gives it the pops of color, green. And I think they said that this summer there hasn't been a single day where they haven't taken at least one phone call outside or done something outside. Whether it's to actually escape their screaming kids or get away from the wife, I don't know, but they at least said that it was a fun place to go out and sit and work, which is
or the husband, I'm sure.
Yeah, or the husband.
I know my wife on a regular basis. I'm sure she'd kill for a terrace or a courtyard.
I definitely am in the same boat as you. There's also, if you go down right below it too, that's actually a wall in another residential building out in Brooklyn. They had, to Eric's previous point, they had all those plants on the left were alive at one point, and we inherited that account when it looked like that with all the brown. So this is your first impression when you walk in, that one with all the dead. Now, I know it definitely is a rhetorical question, but how would that make you feel when you walked in, or from a building manager side or operations side? I don't know if that's the type of image that you would want to present to new tenants, existing tenants. your employees, guests. So what we did was we realized that the irrigation system they were using was either not installed properly or just wasn't conducive to that environment. So we replaced all of that stuff with artificial, which is the right photo. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference unless you're actually smelling it, touching it, and feeling it. But basically what it allowed was it allowed for a really nice, warm, welcoming entrance as soon as you walk in. So it's not that you're looking at brown and wilting plants, but you're looking at something that's thriving. And when you look like you're thriving, it adds the whole success of the building as a whole and that first lobby entrance area.
So you guys do both live and faux planting.
Correct.
And are you, I mean, are you seeing, substantial, I don't know what the right term for it is, sort of advancements in sort of lifelike but faux planting over the years?
Yeah,
Very much so.
yeah. And a lot of the faux stuff now, not only it looks really good, it can last outside as well. So it can be either interior or exterior for exterior use. They got a UV rated now. It goes on cruise ships even, and it looks fantastic.
And how does it, I mean,
costly though, right? Sorry to interrupt.
yeah, I was actually going to ask something about that. Like, how does clearly there's no maintenance on it, but how does the initial cost compare?
Initial cost is much more expensive than going with live, but there is no maintenance on it. There is no upkeep. And in certain instances, quite frankly, you don't have a choice. So we cover a lot of vents that blow air out on a consistent basis on rooftops, right? And so live plants will, again, it'll just dry them right out. So at times we have to use artificial to sort of, again, aesthetically sort of cover the vents and make the, obviously make the terrace place look, not only habitable, but at least inviting when you come up to the space.
Yep.
So.
And what are these artificial plants? What are they made of?
Well, so a lot of the material itself is actually like a plastic, but plastic gives such a negative connotation. You really need to see a lot of the stuff that's out there.
Is it like a recycled, like low VOC sort of situation, or?
Exactly. Yeah, and a lot of the boxwood is made just from that, and that's one of our primary use for the exterior use.
Yep.
What you're seeing here in the lower left-hand corner that Jake is talking about is all interior use, and it's actually a different material. It's not as harsh looking in terms of rigidity. It's actually a lot softer and it's a lot prettier, in my opinion. But some of the boxwoods and things that they're starting to make, especially in Australia, stuff is really fantastic. You really have to go up and touch it and see it.
Yeah, it's cool, and you feel it has a natural touch.
Yeah.
I was going to ask for roof terraces. Are there certain like trees or shrubs that don't work well on roofs? And like, because I think people just envision, like I once went to the most amazing garden on terrace, but then it was dead. So like a few days later. So what are some tips maybe for that?
So I would stay away from cypress. I would stay away from euonymus. I would stay away from plants that skip laurels. I would go more towards junipers. I go more towards cedars. I go more towards ilex. Things that are a lot more hardier, that can withstand the windy elements. You're putting them on a rooftop. They're anywhere between 6, 7, 30 stories up, right? So it's a different environment. They're planted way above ground, obviously. Insulation is not the same as below ground. So you want to choose plants that are going to be a lot stronger, a lot hardier to the harsher environments that the winter usually causes, as well as the summer. And I would stay more towards those varieties as opposed to some of the others.
What about fragrance? Like, is that a common request? Like, we want it to smell a certain way, or, I mean, I think they say that like smell is the most, it triggers your memory like better than anything else.
Yeah, no, that's great. Most people don't even think about it. We have to bring that topic up. So they're like, oh yeah, that's a good point. So fragrances are a part of it, the experience. And I think it's something that should be talked about. The one thing I will say is a lot of people associate fragrances with allergies. It's not necessarily the case, but a lot of times we have to try to explain to the client that the fragrance of the actual flower has nothing to do with being allergic or not.
So it's the actual type of flower, because I'm sure we should talk about that
That's a
too.
really good point.
Allergies,
Yeah, I
right?
didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Things with
Can always
pollen,
be,
yeah.
I'm the culprit of
Are there
that.
are there plants that you guys avoid or don't recommend because, they just shed too many particles, or you have issues with, or there's a common allergy among people?
It's, unfortunately, in Manhattan, we have an abundance of female trees. And I say that unfortunately because not anything to do, obviously, against one over the other, but because of the predominance of one variety, it creates an enormous pollen count here in Manhattan. And some of your common trees that you have, Bradford pears and linden trees that are commonly planted around Manhattan, are really the cause of it. So whatever we're putting up there is not really going to do much worse or much better. But we do try to select, obviously, foliage that we think about that are less pollinated, if you will. And if we do, we try to combine it so that there's equal both male and female species.
I see a really beautiful picture of ivy. What about buildings with ivy? Because doesn't it spread very quickly? Are there fears about using that?
And bamboo.
So bamboo is actually illegal in the state of New York.
Yeah.
Did not know that.
It is an invasive species. So once you plant it in the ground, those roots are going to grow absolutely wild. We actually had a friend of ours have some bamboo planted in his backyard, and it ended up growing through his wood fence that was in the dirt underneath and into his neighbor's yard, and it started picking up his other yard. That happens a lot more, and it even penetrates through concrete and starts to lift up the tiles on the street or in your tree pits or courtyards. So I would say stay away from those.
And bamboo bad. Got it.
It's a cool plant, but just it's so hard to just with the upkeep to keep up. So we just stay away. Ivy is a lot easier because you can train ivy. So those look like they actually are growing on the side of the wall, but they are actually on a wood trellis backing. So it looks like it is actually growing on the wall, but we can train it so it only grows in that one area and it just can go straight up. So it's not that wild overtaking. Some people like that look where it covers the whole building, but a lot of people don't, and they want to show the facade and the actual hard work that you put into the building. So there's ways to train it so you can have a symbiotic relationship between both. In that specific case, they just had a seating area outside in their amenity space in a courtyard, and they didn't want to have people just staring through the window, terrace, to just look through. So they kind of created this concept with us to where we created basically these ivy trellis privacy screens. So they're in front of each of the windows. It looks like it's growing up on the side of the building, but it's actually just acting as a nice privacy screen from the inside to the outside terrace.
What do you think of that product, green screen, which is basically like a 3D cage for ivy? I assume that wood, depending upon what type of wood and species, it can retain moisture, which may or may not benefit the ivy, versus I assume that the green screen, which is my understanding is basically like a 3-dimensional wire cage, can't do that. Is one better than the other, or you have any thoughts? I see it a lot, sort of trying to use it as screening devices or parking garages, outdoor parking lots to sort of, do you guys have any opinion about the best way to train the ivy or the best products to train it against?
Wood is always the best, right? Because it really latches on to wood typically. They also grow on metal as well. You can train them on that too. Depends on what ivy you're talking about, right? So Boston ivy is probably one of the most aggressive. And those are the ones that you see latch onto the buildings that really do the harm of the facade of the buildings. Those are the ones that I'd be very leery of. And those are the ones that I would try, like as Jake said, put them on some kind of backing that would obviously keep it away from the building. But getting back to your question, I think moisture is a key component to ivy, right? So I think that plants like the moisture on the leaves. I think they like the moisture in the ground, especially ivy likes to be more on the wetter side typically, depending on the ivy that you're talking about. So I'm more of an advocate of where anywhere that moisture can sort of come into play for the plants. And again, like even just watering a plant, it's misting the leaves too, right? It's just part of the nature of a plant. When rainfall hits, it's hitting the entire plant, not just the bottom of the plant. So anywhere you can add moisture, I think is always a benefit.
I love these solutions. So, I mean, mechanicals are just ugly. No offense to the mechanicals, but these are some really great, I believe. I mean, looks like all these are instances of hiding
Yes, that is
uh,
correct.
And
Yeah.
these all going back to faux. So these are all faux boxwoods that you're looking at right now.
So we have this problem a lot that we help tons of residential clients with. They have HVAC units up on their rooftop and they want to use some sort of the space to maybe have furniture or some people to go sit out there. But honestly, like you said, Elise, who wants to sit next to some HVAC unit just blowing in your ear, not just because of the heat that it gives off, but just the noise and just the aesthetics behind it. So this particular client wanted to cover it and they ideally wanted live plants, like a lot of our clients, if not all of ours, do. But this is another case where it was just inevitable where you can't. So if you put the live plants in front of it, the amount of heat and temperature that gets blown into these plants consistently, not just like the one-offs because they're constantly running, it's inevitable that you're going to have to replace them and just go and over again. So that gets costly. So what we did was, this is actually going back to your earlier question, Chris, too, of the quality of the faux. This is UV rated, this is fire retardant, and this is also heat resistant. So what we did was we put all of this in front of the HVAC unit. Not only did it suppress 90% of the sound, but you wouldn't even be able to tell that there's a HVAC unit there, and it looks like it's real and it will never have to be replaced for the foreseeable future.
What about for snow? And
Same
how
thing.
does
It
in the
will
winter?
last.
Okay, that's
Yep.
great.
Does the boxwood, does it have some sort of special backer? I mean, the fact that it's cutting down so much noise, I mean, that's pretty impressive. Like, what's the sort of assembly of it?
Yeah, so what we do
Not to
is-
get too nerdy.
No, it's great. So we have a structural engineer on staff, and what we do is we actually figure out not only the weight, again, going back to the weight load, but also the wind load of what's going on in the terrace as well. So basically it's on a metal backing with wood in between, which helps suppress the actual noise. And the wood can be covered if you want it to be. So in this case, a lot of times neighboring buildings don't want to see the back of the wood, so we do cover it or we paint it.
Is it like a pressure treated plywood or something, or?
Yep.
Okay. So for anybody who doesn't know, that's like a marine grade outdoor plywood, so it won't rot if it gets wet.
Correct.
Exactly. And they're also weighted down in the planters too, so that if any huge gusts of wind come through, it's not going to just topple over as one big weight. But on top of that, the boxwood actually, you can't even tell in the picture, you can't even tell in person, has tiny, tiny little holes that actually allow the wind to seep through so that it doesn't just hit a wall and fall over. So it's all able to kind of last and withstand any of those big winds. So.
We're just looking at some of the beautiful, I know you do landscaping, but then you also do, inviting spaces. And I think, people often walk into a building and they don't have these elaborate areas, but they can decorate their spaces with little touches like this. And I know, like with buildings that I have sold, we always had a fresh bouquet of flowers come on a weekly basis. And then when it became a little costly, we went to the really good artificial ones. But I think that these are also really great ways to transform spaces and give them personality. Like, a succulent versus a floral really changes the appearance of a building. Even though it sounds so little, like it's amazing what it does.
And this is exactly like with brand image and your first impression. When you walk in and you see something, it doesn't have to be over the top. It can just be subtle, just a little pop of color. It just tells so much. And oftentimes less says more. So you really can do a lot with just a little hint of color. And of course, as you have events or, key holidays come up like Valentine's Day or Mother's Day, you can get more creative with the different types of flowers, how it's designed, colors, and you can kind of tie it into those as well, just to show thanks, like for Father's Day or for July 4th. I know we just did kind of like a USA themed floral arrangement for one of our clients, and that was pretty cool. So, you can kind of get really creative with all of that as well. So.
Great. And I guess, we have key takeaways, which I want to get to, but for people who want to have the bang for the buck, they don't have buildings are getting very restricted with their ability to spend on just aesthetics. So what are your ideas of, I guess, bang for the buck? Like, is it artificial versus fresh? Is it, annuals versus perennials or what have you? So what are your recommendations on that?
Think first, and I know Eric will touch upon it too, but
Give away all of your secrets right here, right now.
I think the key part of it is doing a really strategic discovery process and figuring out where the key and strategic areas in your space are that you want to focus on. And it goes back to my just previous sentence of less, a lot of times says more. Don't bombard the space. Don't overcrowd the space. Even though you might want to have a plant in every corner or something, you don't necessarily need to. So what are the key areas that you want to focus on? Typically, it's your reception area when you walk in. Typically, it's the lobby. And typically, it's seating areas or common spaces. If you could focus on those three, it always 9 out of 10 times in our experience ends up being, hey, this is more than enough, and usually ends up adding more, but it definitely just says more than what you need to if you just focus on the key areas that get the most consistent foot traffic.
And then also think about like what you said about using perennials, using plant material that is going to come up every year and not just be a one and done type of thing, especially if there is a restricted budget.
Yep.
So all those things need to be talked about, communicated, and thought about when, you know, designing your landscaping or your interior entranceway going forward.
Yeah, it's like I love what are they? Hydrangeas, but hydrangeas don't grow everywhere consistently and their colors can change, and you might plant white and it turns green, which I've done. And so I guess there's just inconsistency. And some of our properties have really vast land, you know, so they can do so much with their spaces. And then some of our properties, you know, have very limited abilities. So I think it's great. What amenities are like, what we discussed the Zen gardens. Are there any other landscaping tips that are more in versus out in landscaping?
Or throw out something weird that we've never heard before
and might not want to repeat.
Yeah, there you go.
I would say in our experience, some sort of like wellness room has become a huge one, whether it is for meditation, whether it's for fitness and just kind of have something in there, whether it's a yoga studio and like a salt yoga room. I know we've done a bunch of those and some people have talked to us about it. That is huge, as well as really just any pieces with art as an amenity to offer as a nice aesthetic. So right now what's huge, and it's kind of right behind us, is this whole concept of green walls, but not necessarily living walls, moss walls and preserved moss walls. Those require little, if no maintenance at all going forward. They have the same impact of bringing the natural elements in, and it's not fake, it's real, it's preserved. You can think about it as like in the movies when someone falls asleep in the ice chamber and wakes up 50 years later and they're still, you know, the same age, same everything. It's the same concept. See, I told you I'd say something weird that you could never ever hear, but yeah, you can really do that.
It's that's freeze dried or
exactly. Yep.
Oh wow, okay.
So, and all you need to do with that is give it a little mist every month, just to keep it a little moist, but nothing too crazy, and that's it. But really, it's if it's not a specific room, courtyard, terrace, seating area, or common space, the amenities that we're seeing offering is art pieces that are just really big statement pieces that create that unique brand identity and make not just employees and guests, but everybody do a double take and, you know, turn back and be like, whoa, that was actually really cool and caught my eye.
That's great. I mean, I think, I mean, I'm definitely a proponent for landscaping and creative spaces, especially giving buildings revitalized life, because you're always looking for a way to capitalize and make, you know, your building stand out from the rest. And I think new buildings, you know, always want to keep up, but also, you know, buildings that have been around forever. And I think it's great to tailor your approach. It's not like you can't go into like an 1898 building and have a big moss, you know, maybe you can backdrop, but there's ways that you can create warm experiences that can revitalize your space. So I think what you offer is great.
And it has to be for the space too, like you said,
yeah.
So,
well, you all have been phenomenal. Thank you so much, Jake and Eric, for your time tonight, and our dear Chris Alker for your input as well. If you have any questions regarding landscaping or optimizing your roof deck, you know who to call. And we really appreciated your time tonight. We did answer questions as they came this time, so we didn't need to do the Q&A, but we will circulate your information, Eric and Jake, for anyone that is interested, and we're always available for you. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend. It's a long weekend. Celebrate your great outdoors for the 4th of July. All right. Have a great night. Thanks,
Thank you for
guys.
having us. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.